All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to week number 2 of No Punt Intended football podcast here on Entertainment Buddha. Be sure to check out our website, www.entertainmentbuddha.com, for all your entertainment needs, where we make you a better geek one post at a time. With me, as always, is my trusty numbers companion, Justin Ludwig.
Licking my wounds from week 1, licking my wounds.
And you know what? We're in the same boat because as we were discussing earlier, we both finished 7-9 in our picks for week 1. So definitely some surprises and tough calls for some of the picks here. So hopefully this week we get a little better idea of what's going on now that we've seen what some of the teams can do. I'm just going to chalk it up that week 1 is impossible to bet. So that's my excuse.
It's impossible to bet. And then I think everybody has that situation where they pick their fantasy team, and then you get this great feeling after the draft, like your team's going to do really well. And then week 1 comes, and it's that make or break. And for me, it was a break.
Yeah, I'm with you there. My picks were not good. Some of them I thought were completely obvious, like the Chargers over the Cardinals. I took them, and obviously the Cardinals came away with a victory. But we'll get to some of that here in a little bit. We want to talk about a little bit of a more pressing issue with the whole Ray Rice situation. Obviously, it's a pretty terrible thing what happened. We don't know the entire story. We do know a lot of the video. Justin, did you see the newest video that came out yesterday morning?
I did. It kind of takes away some of the, I guess, the ambiguity of the situation, and now it's pretty clear cut what happened.
Right, and we don't know what started it all, but we can obviously see Ray Rice swing in and her head hitting against the elevator, and it's just not a good situation for anybody. And whether that video should have been made available to the public is up for opinion. I know I've heard a couple of different people say that the media is kind of taking control, and the whole thing with the video coming out from TMZ of all places might not have been the best way. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, it's unfortunate that the NFL kind of waited this long to make this decision. They've set a weird precedent on what offenses get you what suspension length. But I mean, it's unfortunate we kind of had to take it to this step for them to make the correct choice in removing him from the NFL for an indefinite amount of time.
Right, because initially he was only suspended for 2 games, and meanwhile Wes Welker takes mollies or basically ecstasy at Kentucky Derby, and he's out for 4 games. I mean, what kind of message does that send to people?
Right, and it's the same thing. I didn't even realize, but Matt Prater for the Denver Broncos, he also violated the substance abuse policy.
Right.
Apparently, he just had a couple of beers, and so that netted him, I think it was a 4-game suspension.
Right,
which I found out right before week 1 because as I was checking my fantasy lineups, I saw a nice SSPD right next to his game, so I had to think quickly, get another kicker. Right,
yeah, and Goodell has come out and said that he hasn't handled the situation the right way, and the NFL claimed they haven't seen this new footage until just Monday earlier this week here. I kind of find that hard to believe. So
yeah, I kind of don't believe that.
Yeah, I think that's just them trying to cover their tracks a little bit, and I think they've taken the right measures now. Better late than never, I guess, but it's still something that shouldn't happen, whether you're a football player or not.
No, and it was nice to hear some of the sentiments from other football players. They didn't really take the side of Ray Rice. They said things like, no matter who you are, this shouldn't happen, and it felt like they were not disowning, but they were kind of just saying that essentially what Ray Rice did is just inexcusable, and they weren't trying to side with him and saying, maybe the facts were messed up, or maybe we don't know the situation. They were just, I think they made a great choice in just saying that essentially what he did is just, it's not, and in no way, shape, or form is what he did right.
Right. And one of the things that stuck out to me in watching SportsCenter, them interviewing some of the players, they spoke with Steelers cornerback William Gay, and he lost his mother to domestic violence, which I didn't realize. And one of the things that struck a chord with me was, he was quoted as saying that we don't need to run away from him and say he's evil. He being Ray Rice, of course. It's an issue that people need to deal with. He needs help. Let's get him help. Let's not, just push him away when he needs, people in his life for, more positive influence now more than ever. So I just thought that was pretty interesting coming from Steelers cornerback William Gay. And Steelers and Ravens are actually meeting up this week here on Thursday night. So we'll get to that in a little bit here. So, but going back to week one here, who are some of your surprises for the week? Let's get started with that.
Well, in a little segment I'm going to call Fantasy Thrillers and Fantasy Chillers. I'll start with the Fantasy Thrillers.
I like that.
Somebody you saw all day Sunday, Alan Hearns for Jacksonville. If you're playing by ESPN standard scoring, he was projected to score a mere 3 points. In all reality, he ended up with 23 for a nice clip for him. And it was interesting because going into the game, they really didn't know who Chad Henne was going to throw to because they didn't have Cecil Shorts.
Right.
I kind of like the physical makeup of Alan Hearns. He's tall, he's kind of quick, but I'm not sure how much of a season long, how much production he's going to get. I mean, he had only 4 receptions. They were big ones, but ultimately it looked like they were blown coverages. It didn't really look like he did anything, super outstanding, but it looks like at least on the short term, Chad Henne has a pretty good target since he doesn't have Cecil Shorts with him. And then the other one that I'm going to label as a thriller, even though it wasn't as big of a gain off of his projection, but Le'Veon Bell, he was projected for 11 points, ended up with 24. Was actually pretty surprised at the card he turned in on Sunday because last year he didn't really do as well as people thought he would do. It seemed like he wasn't really playing up to his strengths. But last Sunday he had 21 carries, 109 yards for a touchdown, also had 6 catches for 88 yards. So he turned in a pretty good game on Sunday, and hopefully he can keep up the good rushing attack for Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I was really surprised at how well. I'm not really surprised, but I was a little bit surprised at how well he played. I was expecting him to come out strong. Definitely surprised at Hearns in Jacksonville. It was frustrating watching him just run all over the Eagles defense. So I guess, when Jacksonville's playing teams with a weaker secondary like the Eagles, he might be a bit more of a factor, especially when Shorts comes back and kind of opens up the field a little bit more. But can we go back to the Steelers game for a second? Like, did you see that Antonio Brown kick to the face?
His swan kick right to the face of the Browns punter?
Yeah, that one.
I only saw it after Facebook started blowing up and everybody kept making these Karate Kid jokes, and I didn't know what they were talking about. But after I saw that video, I thought it was a pretty good description. Yeah,
I was watching that game live, and I saw him return, and I saw him go to jump because a lot of players starting to do that now. They'll just jump and try and hurl over somebody who's going low, but the punter just, instead of continuing forward, just kind of fell backwards a little bit, and that's why he kind of got caught in the throat shoulder area. It was certainly entertaining, and it was we were glad that nobody was seriously hurt. Obviously, my buddy that was watching the game said, if you put that on loop for the next 3 hours, I'll watch it. And I think a lot of people thought that was a pretty fantastic play. Now, I have no idea what the fine's going to be. There's people saying he's going to get fined because it was unnecessary roughness. I doubt, I can't imagine it leads to any suspension of any sort, but I would imagine there's some sort of fine in there at some point.
I mean, the weird thing is, what is his thought process as he's going up towards the apex of his jump? because as he's going up, you get the feeling like he's going to make it over, and then at this point, you just kind of see this moment where he concedes that he's not going to make it over the punter, and then I don't know why he would then think, you know what, I'm just going to drive my foot right into his face.
Yeah, and he kind of already had that leading foot out there, so it was either continue in its motion or I guess try and change abruptly and maybe roll an ankle, or although he could have rolled an ankle on the guy's shoulder. But yeah, it was very interesting play. It would be nice to kind of know what was going on inside his head at the time, and I'd also like to know what was going on inside the punter's head too. I think that would be kind of humorous to get his point of view on it.
It's a bit above his pay grade to get kicked in the face.
Yeah, he didn't sign up for this. All right, so let's see. Who are some of your? Do you have any other thrillers?
No more thrillers. Unfortunately, on one of my fantasy teams, I have the fantasy chiller of the week, and that was Jamal Charles, who had 2 points after being projected to score 24, and he only carried the ball a couple of times for a couple of yards.
Yeah, I noticed that too when I was looking at some of the box stats, and I was really surprised. Like, did he get hurt? Like, because I wasn't keeping a close eye on. I didn't have anybody on my fantasy team in that game. I wasn't too worried about it. So, it just kind of shocked me that he had, like you said, a couple carries for a couple yards, in the entire game.
Well, it was really weird because Tennessee, they're up 10-3 at the half. So even in the entire first half, you think that they would have, that Kansas would have, somewhat of a balanced attack. They only ran the ball, let's see, what was their finish? 17 times the whole game, of which 6 carries were by their quarterback, Alex Smith. So it's not like they had these design runs all over the game, which is weird.
Right.
Especially since they didn't have Dwayne Bowe. It turns out that they relied on Donnie Avery for 7 receptions, but it just seemed weird that they weren't going to go with more of a balanced attack and giving more carries to Jamal Charles, who seems to do pretty good year in and year out. I just didn't really understand it.
Well, you know what? I have the explanation for you if you're interested. I blame Andy Reid.
Yeah, that seems like the consensus.
His latter years in Philadelphia, when he had the uprising of LaShawn McCoy, and as an Eagles fan surrounded by other Eagles fans, we were like, why don't you give him the ball more? It's first down. They've been run the ball strong all game, and he decides to pass it, and they get an interception or fumble or something like that. Like, it seemed to happen more often than it should, and he just seems to want to abandon the running game even when it's working for him. So I don't know if it's just something in his head or just how he's wired, but he's got one of the best running backs in the game in Jamal Charles, and just, I guess, chose not to use him as much as he could have in week 1. So maybe that's something they work on for next week.
Yeah, it seems like that's been their general game plan the last couple of years. He's been getting fewer touches. 2012, he had 285. Last year, he had 259 carries. And it seems like they want to go towards something more pass heavy, but it's without their normally most used receiver, Dwayne Bowe, who even he's been having a couple of down years the last couple of years. It just seemed weird that they only got a couple of carries. And so this week I'll have something a little more worth the high draft position he's been earning himself in most fantasy leagues. He's got currently a 16-point projection, but he is going up against Denver. So it might turn out to be one of those situations in which Kansas goes down early. Kansas has to rely on the pass a little bit more. So we'll see.
Right, and they are playing Denver this coming week, so there's a pretty good chance they're going to go down early. And as you mentioned, Alex Smith had 6 carries. I just looked it up here. He was the rushing leader for that game with 6 carries and 36 yards. So that's not looking good for Chiefs fans who are kind of hoping for a Jamal Charles, rushing attack like they had last year. All right, and who else? You got another chiller for us?
No, just a couple. It's week 1's a little bit tough to gauge. We'll see what happens this second week, so we can get a kind of a feel for who's playing up to their level and who's not playing up to their level.
All right, we'll look forward to that. I know I'll certainly be keeping an eye out now in week 2 as to who's performing and who isn't. So Thank you for bringing that to the cast here. We can move right along. Let's see what we got. Go ahead and let's see. Go ahead and do our week 1 picks if you're interested. Actually, you know what? Before we do that, let's talk about Jadeveon Clowney. Clowney goes down in week 1. He's out for 4 to 6 weeks. He's your rookie of the year in the AFC. Are you taking blame for his injury?
I guess I'll just take blame since I picked him last week. It's funny because Coach Bill O'Brien says I'm not a doctor, so I don't know. He should have said something like Bones McCoy from Star Trek and said something like, "Damn it, I'm a coach, not a doctor."
I like that. Maybe that's something he can put in his back pocket for the future. That the next time somebody gets hurt.
Oh, if only. I'll have to tweet him or something.
You should do that. See if he can get a response out of that. Yeah, it was a tough. I mean, J.J. Watt had a fantastic game, so he definitely picked up the slack. It helped that they were playing Washington. RG3 didn't come out as strong as some people were hoping. There's some questions surrounding him. In my opinion, Kirk Cousins could be starting for 8 or 9 teams in the NFL, and there he is sitting as a backup in Washington. So it kind of makes me wonder why in the offseason they could have traded him. They probably could have gotten a first round or a high second round pick for him, and they chose to keep him on the team. So it kind of makes you wonder if they really think RG3 is the way to go, or what their plan is for the future.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about this when we get to the Washington and Houston games. But in week 1, there were a couple of games that I think we learned absolutely nothing. And one of those is definitely that Washington professional football team losing to the Houston Texans, because is it that Houston's not that bad or that Washington is that bad? But I'll save a lot of those points when we get to the Jacksonville-Washington line, because I have some thoughts about that particular game line.
All right. Well, we won't share too much of your information just yet, so we'll keep that in the back pocket for now. But let's go ahead and get started with our week 2 picks. Thursday night we have Steelers and Ravens, as I had mentioned earlier. The line is Baltimore at -2.5.
As a refresher, both of us happened to finish at 7-9 for last week's picks, which is, as far as the Vegas Super Contest goes, they usually get around, about 57, 58% of them right. But then again, they're only picking 5 games. So 7-9 hovers around 50%, which I think is fair, especially in that really topsy-turvy, weird week 1.
Right. So, we should just claim the money from the Super Contest, right?
Yeah.
All right. Done and done.
As far as Pitt and Baltimore, I have a feeling like this whole Ray Rice thing is going to be just kind of take the wind out of their sails. So I really like Pittsburgh +2.5.
Okay. I'm in the same boat with you. I think the Ray Rice thing's just a dark cloud over the organization. I know by them, terminating Ray Rice and the NFL banning him indefinitely, they're going to try and move on from that as quickly as possible. But it's a short week for both teams. They have a 3-day rest, going from Sunday and then playing Thursday. So I like the way the Steelers played on Sunday. Granted, they kind of let Cleveland back into the game, but they still got the win. So I'm going to go with the Steelers as well at +2.5. I just think, they were looking pretty solid on offense. Le'Veon Bell is a solid running back, as you had mentioned, and they had some very good receiving yardage out of Antonio Brown and Marcus Wheaton as well. So I think Pittsburgh's going to be too strong. I think Pittsburgh probably wins by 5 or 6 points. So I'm going to take them.
It was such a weird game because Pittsburgh comes out, and I see the little ticker at the bottom because we didn't have the Pittsburgh game, oddly enough. But at the half, it's 27-3 Pittsburgh, so you think they're just going to rout the Cleveland Browns, but then it turns out that the game entirely switches, not unlike that Eagles-Jaguars game, and right. Cleveland comes back, and to my surprise, they actually tied it up. But I think the running game for Pittsburgh showed a lot of things, especially with Le'Veon Bell again, he really outperformed his projection, which I think is a nice something for them to have, as well as their passing game also didn't do too bad. Antonio Brown had 116 yards on 5 catches, had a touchdown. It seems like Big Ben is feeling pretty comfortable with throwing the deep ball, so it looks like they can, play the ground game for a lot, and then Big Ben can air it out when he wants to.
Yeah, and not only did Antonio Brown have 5 receptions for 116 yards and a touchdown, he also had a karate kick to end all karate kicks. So
no fantasy points for that, though.
Well,
not yet, anyway.
You know what? Maybe they add that, but then the NFL becomes too rough for people, and then they can't handle it. So
it's like participation points when you get graded in school. It's just this nebulous like extra 10 points that you can tack on for feats of feet.
Exactly. I like that. The feats of feet. Okay. All right, and then next up here we have Dolphins at Bills. Miami is -1.
Oh boy, this line is really tempting. You know what this line is really tempting for? A 3-team teaser. You know what I just found out? A 3-team teaser. I never promised that I was the brightest bulb in the box, and I really didn't understand what a 3-team teaser meant. But last Sunday I went and I kind of worked through a real, a theoretical example, and I plugged in a couple of different teams and just to try and figure out what it meant to do a 3-team teaser. And now that I think I understand it, it's kind of a slippery slope. But for this game, Miami only laying 1 point, and especially them beating New England last week, I feel like the Dolphins have kind of proved their worth a little bit in the AFC East, and I feel like I might want to add this to a 3-team tease, but I'm going to take Miami -1.
Okay. All right. I like that pick. And as well as Buffalo played against Chicago, I don't know if they can keep it up. They were definitely a surprise in week 1. I thought Chicago was going to run all over them, but obviously that didn't happen. I had picked the Dolphins to cover against New England. I didn't expect them to win outright, but I expected them to make it, a 1 or 2 point game. So I was pleased with the way the Dolphins played. Their air attack was very, very good. Mike Wallace had some great receptions. They got Charles Clay, Brian Hartline involved. No Sean Moreno had a touchdown, and Lamar Miller. They were running really, really well. So. Yeah, just looking at the stats real quick, Moreno had 24 carries for 134 yards and a touchdown. That speaks volumes for where their running game's going and for where their offensive line is. I think Tannehill was sacked once the whole game. He wasn't hurried or rushed very much, so their offensive lines definitely picked things up compared to previous seasons. So I'm going to take the Dolphins again. I just think they're going to be too diverse and too well-rounded for the Bills to squeak out another victory.
No, you're right. Tannehill wasn't attacked as much. He didn't look. He didn't look extremely sharp in this game. But the nice thing for the Dolphins is they get no Sean Moreno to get a whole bunch of yards for them, which I think was a little unexpected. I'm not even sure if he's number 1 in their depth chart right now. But the nice thing going against Buffalo is that they got beat up with their secondary against Chicago last week, who threw the ball all over the field. And now it seems like Ryan Tannehill has a couple of different threats with Mike Wallace with the deep ball. And then he still has Brian Hartline, who can sort of shoot those dump-off passes, those checkdowns too.
Right, and Noshawn Moreno too. He's a solid back out of the backfield for screen passes. And if he's a guy that if he's healthy, he can and will produce. So it'll be interesting to keep an eye on that and see what transpires here in this game on Sunday. All right, and the next one we have, we touched on it briefly. We have the Washington professional football team against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Washington's -5.5 at home.
I don't understand this line. Do you understand this line?
I don't. I don't at all.
I don't get it. Like I said earlier, there was that one game. It was the Houston-Washington game. I don't think we really learned anything. But essentially, they're saying that above the home team 3-point advantage, they're giving Washington another 3 points. I don't understand that.
Yeah, I mean, I would think the way week 1 went, and I guess it's it's also dependent a bit too on how people are betting. So I guess people are thinking Washington's got the win in the bag against Jacksonville. If Jacksonville plays like they did last week, if Hearns has even a slightly similar game, if they get Marquise Lee involved a little bit more, I mean Jacksonville's running game didn't really have anything. Toby Gerhart had 18 carries for a whopping 42 yards. I mean I think the Jaguars can still compete though, just because the Redskins I think are that bad. So I don't understand the -5.5. So I'm taking Jacksonville, and then can I assume you are as well?
Well, it's really weird that they're putting such a strong money line bet on Washington to win this game. You're right. Jacksonville's running game pretty much sucks. Toby Gerhart, I don't think you can put a lot of stock into him to do, the same kind of workload that a top tier back will do. Chad Henne had an okay game. It was kind of the exact opposite of the trend that Nick Foles had. The first half, he seemed to be able to find those mismatches and coverages. He was able to find Allen Hurns for some really big gains. So it looks like their passing game has flashes of something that's really good. The thing that I'm really concerned about is that it seems like the Washington game plan is going to be exactly the same game plan that Philadelphia trotted out during the first half, which is they're going to have a quarterback who can kind of move around in the pocket. They're going to have a pretty strong running game with, I can't remember his name now. Why can't I remember his name? The running back for the Washington professional football team.
Alfred Morris.
Alfred Morris, thank you. They're going to be able to rely on Alfred Morris, a decent bit. He had a nice game last week, but it doesn't seem like RG3 is really comfortable throwing the ball down the field other than, checkdowns and short passes. As an example, last week, RG3 only had a couple attempts downfield. He threw the ball downfield 4 times, of which 2 were caught for a long gain of 48 yards. And then on the opposite side, Nick Foles, who during the first half really didn't do a lot of, deep passing, but then later I think they got their game plan a little more in sync with what they were trying to do. But over the entire game, Nick Foles threw 13 balls downfield, and 2 of those were big gains, and 2 of those were big touchdowns. So it seems like if Washington plays the same game that Philly did the first half, this Washington -5.5 is just going to get completely poo-pooed on.
Right. And the other thing that bothers me a little bit about the Washington team is it doesn't seem like they've figured out exactly how they want to use Deshaun Jackson right now. I know they had him on some short kind of bubble passes, and they tried to send him downfield here and there. And I know he's a threat, and I know teams are probably gonna put a little more pressure on him, maybe double cover him at times. But guys like Pierre Garçon are gonna have to step up and find ways to get open. When they're guarded by one guy instead of multiple like Deshaun. So I think that's kind of the thing he brings. So, and that's something that maybe Washington isn't used to, because it's been a while since they've had a receiver that can do the things Deshaun Jackson can do. So that's kind of why I'm still hesitant on this Washington at -5.5. So I think I'm sticking with the Jaguars. I think it's probably going to be one of those games where it turns out the score would be like 21-20 or something like that, something close, not super high scoring, just because both offenses aren't very good. And the defense. Granted, Jacksonville had a very, very good first half against the Eagles. A lot of that was Nick Foles holding on to the ball too long, in my opinion. So, he had, I think, 3 turnovers in the first half alone. So, obviously, the second half, they rectified that situation and got the victory. But, yeah, I'm going to take Jaguars, and I think they get their first win of the year on Sunday.
Yeah, and I'm just going to note that I'm going to bet quite a few Oreo cookies on this game and definitely throw it into a 3-team tease. So already we're only 3 games deep, and I've already got 2/3 of a 3-team tease ready and lined up.
Well, that just means you have plenty more to choose from.
I know. Maybe I'll have to do a couple of 3-team teasers to make up for none last week.
There you go. Well, here's one you can think about here. We have the Cowboys and Titans, and Tennessee's -3.5 at home.
I don't really want to put a lot of stock in this game. I'm taking Tennessee -3.5, but it's one of those. It's going to be a tale of two teams potentially. Dallas, they don't get to play their game when they're down, and that's exactly what happened last week against San Francisco. They go down early. They kind of have to go to this pass heavy offense, which, as Tony Romo showed off, he clearly isn't capable of doing, driving them down the field and straight into the arms of an interception. But if it's one of those games where Dallas can get up early, and then they can kind of play the clock management game and let DeMarco kind of run all over the defense, I think they'll be okay. But it's kind of like that conditional thing. DeMarco had 22 carries, 118 yards last game, so he definitely is showing his worth. But then unfortunately, Tony Romo throws for 3 interceptions. So
Right. Yeah,
I mean, if Dallas can get to that point where they play the clock management game and they're able to just run the ball more often, I think they'll be all right. But I mean, as far as the Washington line, I thought that doesn't make sense. This Titans -3.5, I'm pretty comfortable with that.
yeah, and I'm with you on that one. I'm taking the Titans. Dallas just didn't show anything last week aside from DeMarco Murray. Their defense is probably one of the worst in the league. They lost DeMarcus Ware. They lost Sean Hill for the year to an injury, but they didn't really do anything to bolster that defense. So they didn't go out and sign anybody. They didn't really draft anybody. So you kind of wonder what their thinking is trying to go with the guys they have. It's almost like the movie Major League, where you're just throwing a bunch of ragtags, has-beens together and hoping it works out. So whether they have a cardboard cutout of Jerry Jones in a Speedo, I'm not sure, but hopefully that's not the case. As far as Titans go, I like Jake Locker. He showed signs of brilliance last year, when he was healthy, and that's something he can build off of. And I think going against a bad secondary like the Cowboys is gonna boost his confidence a little bit more. So I think that 3.5 for the Titans is okay with me, and I'm going to go ahead and take that.
Right, and it really doesn't help for Dallas that they've already lost Orlando Scandrick out of their secondary to a suspension. They're also down Sean Lee, who's on injured reserve, and it seems like they just can't keep players on the field for their defense. So if Jake Locker has a good game, Tennessee's going to do well.
Right. And Tennessee didn't really get their running game going too much last week. Sean Green led the team with 15 carries and 71 yards, but no touchdowns. The rookie Bishop Sankey, a lot of people I think are high on, didn't really do anything. So hopefully, they kind of start spreading their offense around a little bit more. I think once they do that, they can start impressing some people. Their leading receiver last week was Hunter at 3 receptions and 63 yards, 0 touchdowns. So they definitely need to build on that a little bit more. And I think playing the Cowboys this week, they're going to be able to do that.
Yeah, it's interesting they kind of distributed the carries as much as they did. Sean Green got 15 carries. Utility player Dexter McCluster got 9. Rookie Bishop Sankey got 6. It would be nice to just let Sankey get a game where he kind of gets the bulk of the carries just to see what he can do. Maybe if Tennessee goes up early, Sankey gets a lot more carries and they kind of let Sean Green take a day off.
Yeah, and I think that's eventually what's going to happen. It's kind of a similar thing that happened in Cincinnati last year with, the number one on the depth chart was BenJarvus Green-Ellis, but Giovanni Bernard was a rookie. They started out, majority of the carries went to Green-Ellis, then Giovanni Bernard started to get a few more, started to feel comfortable in the offense, and, the NFL fast-paced game, started to suit him. And, by the end of the year or late season, at least, they were splitting carries pretty evenly. So I think that's probably what you'll see between Sean Green and Sankey, unless there's some sort of injury or anything like that. I think they're pretty much going to split 50-50 or, unless Sankey comes out and just has a game where he, rushes for 200 yards. All right, and let's go to the next game here. We have Cardinals at Giants. Arizona's -1.5 on the road.
I mean, it was interesting to see the Detroit Giants game because I mean, I feel like we did learn a little bit. We learned that Detroit is still a pretty dangerous passing team, and I think we learned that Giants offense just still kind of sucks. It just looked like they really couldn't get a lot of momentum in that game, and they couldn't get anything going. As far as Arizona laying 1.5 points, I mean, they proved a lot by winning over San Diego on Monday night, but I guess it's a fair line. I'll take Arizona minus 1.5, but I think really it's Carson Palmer's game to either win or lose.
Yeah, and I did not the Giants. I don't even know where to start with them. I mean, they still have solid receivers. They still have Victor Cruz and Ruben Randall, who and Victor Cruz even came out and said if the team wants to win, they have to give him the ball. And it sounds greedy of him, but it also makes sense. I mean, you can't have your number one receiver not be your leading receiver. Giants' leading receiver last year was had 5 receptions, 56 yards, and a touchdown. And their running game. I mean, granted, the running game against Detroit is going to be tough with Ndamukong Suh and Nick Fairley on that defensive line. Rashad Jennings had 16 carries, 46 yards. He did have a touchdown, which is good to see, but he's not going to be that number one workhorse type of running back. So I think that's going to be kind of a temporary thing. Maybe for the year he stays there, as the number one, but this is definitely kind of a rebuilding year for the Giants. So I'm going to take the Cardinals as well. It's their defense is really starting to step up. I was surprised that they were able to beat San Diego last night on the Monday night game, and I really thought San Diego was just going to blow them out of the water. But Arizona really stepped up, and Larry Fitzgerald continues his streak of games with a catch. He's up to 150 now. He only had one last night, but that's all that matters. He got the one. So, and Andre Ellington had an okay game, but San Diego's defense did kind of get a little beefier this year on the line too. So, Ellington's a guy who many are thinking is going to have a breakout year. I know he was kind of high in the fantasy league, mock draft. So I'm going to take Arizona, as I mentioned, and even at minus 1.5 on the road, I think they'll beat the Giants. Might be a little closer than some think, but like you said, I think it's Carson Palmer's to win or lose.
Yeah, it's going to be easier for Arizona to control the pace of the game. Their defense is looking pretty sharp, as well as Carson Palmer, who the second half of last year had a pretty solid year. And even on Monday night, he had a pretty good card of 304 yards, 2 touchdowns. So it seems like as long as their passing game can stay in check, they will probably cut up the Giants secondary.
Yeah, and they were able to win that game last night, like I said, with only getting Larry Fitzgerald involved on one, with one to catch. So that's definitely a spotlight. Floyd had 5 receptions for 119 yards. So him and Fitzgerald together are problems for secondary. So I think that's something they can build on. And if Carson Palmer can make solid quarterback decisions in the pocket, they could string together a few wins and maybe surprise some people. And next up here, we have the Minnesota Vikings against the New England Patriots. New England is minus 3.5, also on the road.
It's a tale of two momentums. I mean, the Patriots get beat by the Dolphins of all teams last week in a bit of a surprise, and Minnesota absolutely destroys the Rams. So it's kind of a tale of the oh boy, I'm really blanking here. The unstoppable momentum versus the immovable momentum. It's New England that's been sitting atop the AFC East for so many years. It seems like they might actually get dethroned, and now, especially with Matt Castle surprising everybody by leading that passing attack and getting such a really great game out of Cordarrelle Patterson, who kind of had some nice flashes with not only receiving but rushing, especially in that long surprise play. But it's I'm not quite sure that Minnesota has the steam, and especially with New England's beefed up secondary this year, that the Vikings can overtake New England. So that's why I'm comfortable with New England giving 3 points.
All right, and I'm with you too. I don't even know when the last time the Patriots lost back-to-back games. I know it's been a long time, so that's something I've learned is you don't bet against Brady and Belichick after a loss. So even on the road, even laying minus 3.5 points to the Vikings, I think Brady's gonna do his thing and lead the troops to victory against the Vikings. And I wouldn't be surprised if it was a bit of a blowout by the Patriots. Not saying they have the ability to blow out every team, but I think Brady's going to come in firing this week. He doesn't like to lose, and he doesn't like to lose against a AFC rival either. And I go into Matt Castle. He did have a solid game. He only had 170 yards passing, but he did have 2 touchdowns. And it's weird not seeing Adrian Peterson's name as the leading rusher. It was Patterson. He had 3 carries for 102 yards and that touchdown, as you had mentioned. So he's definitely an X factor, whether he's behind the quarterback or spread out wide. So he's a fun guy to watch, and I hope he continues to do well. But I think this week the Patriots come away with a victory, and I'll take that 3.5.
What's also working for New England is that it's probably going to be cooler temperatures as we've cooled down this week. So Bill Belichick is going to be wearing that hoodie with the sleeves cut off. That's his bread and butter. That seems like that's the X factor. Last week was Cordarrelle Patterson for the Vikings. This week is going to be Bill Belichick's cut off sweatshirt.
Hey, you know what? That works for him. It's comfortable, and he doesn't care what people think. So I kind of admire his confidence. Maybe not so much the fashion choice, but he's got the confidence, and he's a Super Bowl champion, so I guess he can do whatever he wants.
Of course he cut the sleeves off. It looks awesome. Oh, and to answer your question, the last time the Pats lost 2 in a row was 2012. They lost in Week 2 to Arizona, losing 20-18, and then they lost in Week 3 to Baltimore, 31-30. Well, so even though they lost 2 games, they only lost by 2 points and then 1 point. So it's not like they got blown out.
Right. Yeah,
So I think you're right. I think you're right in your sentiment that you don't bet against Brady and Belichick after losing.
Yeah, that's just one of those things where you just start making mental notes throughout the year. I think this is Brady and Belichick's 13th season together, or something crazy like that. So, they know each other about as well as any quarterback and coach can know a coach. So, and that's. Yeah, I think their game plan is going to be strong. Like you said, they're not going to be playing in 110 degree heat like they did down in Miami. Whether that had a huge effect on them or not, I don't know if we'll ever know. But Miami at least had the advantage in training in that and being used to the heat, as opposed to New England. And next up here, let's see what we got. We got the Cleveland Browns against the New Orleans Saints. Saints are minus 6.5 on the road.
Well, last week, New Orleans didn't do so hot against, or at least as hot as they thought they would do against Atlanta. I'm not quite sure what to make of this line. It's kind of this nebulous, negative 6.5, where they think that New Orleans is much better than they played last week, but they also, I guess they don't really have a read on Cleveland, but I'm not sure which way it goes. Nevertheless, I'm going to take New Orleans giving 6.5.
Yeah, and I think last week, Hoyer and the Browns surprised a lot of people. I know we were both pretty confident that the Steelers would be able to, beat them by. I think the line was 6.5 last week for the Steelers-Browns game, or something close to that. And the Saints losing to Atlanta the way they did, and Marquez Colston's fumble at the end of the game there that gave the Falcons the field goal to win the game. I think they'll be out with a chip on their shoulder. I think Breeze is gonna play, kind of frisky and loose, and they really got Brandon Cooks involved, which I was happy about. I think he ended up with 77 yards or so and a touchdown. And I think the Saints are just going to be too much. The Browns' defense is good. I just think the Saints have too many weapons. with Jimmy Graham, and they have pretty solid rushing attack, and Mark Ingram and Kyrie Robinson has had a few carries last week. So I think the Saints are going to be too much. I'm going to pick them over the Browns, even at -6.5 on the road.
Yeah, the Saints are just way too loaded. Pittsburgh, even though they did have some good weapons with Le'Veon Bell, I think it's just going to be way too many things for the Browns defense to cover.
Can't argue with that point there. And just to go over a quick couple of stats here. Mark Ingram had 13 carries for 6 yards and 2 touchdowns. Colson had 5 receptions for 110 yards. So they're getting the ball. They have a pretty solid balance. I know previously the Saints were mostly a passing team. I still think a lot of people view him as that, but Mark Ingram is kind of growing into that leading back role. So I think he's going to continue to progress, and that's just going to open up the game for them. And let's see. Speaking of the Saints-Falcons game, next up we have Falcons at the Bengals. Cincinnati is -5.5 at home.
It's an interesting line because it seems like they're putting a lot of doubt on the Atlanta Falcons, and they're putting a lot of stock in Cincinnati. I mean, Cincinnati did overcome that 2-point underdog of a week last week when they beat Baltimore 23-16. Atlanta did the same thing when they were the underdog by 3 points to New Orleans, winning 37-34 in overtime. So it's strange how many points, I think, is my point about this game, is that they're giving Cincinnati so many. I don't feel like it's going to be quite in the direction that Vegas is taking it. I think Atlanta's going to come out. They're going to come out firing, and I think with their passing attack, they're going to kind of get a little more comfortable with who they actually have in the lineup this year. This seems like a great capper for my 3-team teaser, especially where it'll put Atlanta if I take them, and I feel most comfortable taking Atlanta.
Okay, and I mean, I see your points too. It's kind of tough though to go against the Bengals at home. With AJ Green and Giovanni Bernard. Now let's see. Bernard had 14 carries for 48 yards last week. AJ Green had 6 receptions for 131 yards and a touchdown. So, Dalton threw for over 300. Matt Ryan threw for 448 against the Saints. So I think the Bengals defense is a little tougher than New Orleans. I think the Falcons are going to have a little bit of a tougher time. I don't think they'll put up as many points as they did against New Orleans. I'm going to go ahead. I just got a gut feeling about the Bengals. I'm going to take the Bengals at -5. I think they'll be able to keep it close as long as they don't shoot themselves in the foot. They might not win the game outright, but I believe they'll at least keep it kind of a close game, maybe another 3-point squeaker for the Falcons like last week.
Right. The thing in the Bengals' favor is that Atlanta gave up so many points. They gave up so many passing yards to a team that's obviously built, as you said, sort of around the run this year, but traditionally New Orleans is a pass-heavy team, and Atlanta just gave up way too many passing yards last week, and Cincinnati seems to be mostly a pass-heavy team. They had a lot of receptions from a lot of different players last game, so it seems like if Atlanta can't contain the pass, then Cincinnati might do a little better than I predict, but I still don't think that they're going to overcome this 5.5 points off.
Okay, and so yeah, and I just have a feeling too. The Falcons' defense isn't as great, or as good as people were kind of hoping. So I think if Cincinnati can get their rushing attack going early and kind of set the pace in that part, that'll just open up the receipt, because they're going to have to spend or pay so much attention to AJ Green, because you just have to. You can't just let him go one-on-one. It'll be too easy for him. So, he definitely opens up the running game for Cincinnati, so maybe they could take advantage of that this week here. And the next game we have here, this one's interesting to me. Lions at Panthers. Carolina's -2.5.
It's another one of those games that they're putting their stock into a team that I wouldn't have expected, especially with Detroit coming out and having such a great Monday night game. Carolina, even though they might have Cam Newton in the lineup. I checked a little earlier, and Cam Newton is currently listed as questionable. Even though Carolina had a better game than people would have expected with Cam Newton out of the lineup and beating Tampa Bay last week, I don't know that their head is in the right place. Vegas's, that is. And I don't believe that Carolina is going to have as easy of a time against Detroit, and especially with Detroit having such the arsenal that they have. Taking Detroit.
All right, and I'm with you too, and I just checked here, see if there are any updates, and I do see that barring a setback, Cam Newton will be back this week, so maybe that's why the line is -2.5 for Carolina. They think Cam Newton's going to come back strong. I don't think it'll be enough. Calvin Johnson and Reggie Bush and Joique Bell and Matt Stafford, they're just too powerful, as they showed against the Giants. Granted, the Panthers' defense is way ahead of the Giants, so maybe that'll kind of throw a few wrenches in the gears here and there, but I still think the Lions have what it takes to win handedly. Unless Matt Stafford has one of those games where he throws 3 picks and has a fumble or something like that. Or, Carolina's special teams comes out strong and is able to score a touchdown or something to that effect. But I'm taking the Lions as well, and that might be one of my super contest picks if I were to be doing the super contest, of course.
If you were to do such a thing.
Yeah, if such a thing were to occur. Just going over some of the stats, I mean, Calvin Johnson had 7 receptions for 164 yards and 2 touchdowns. He basically just kind of took a break in the second half because he got most of those in the first half. So Joique Bell had 15 carries, 51 yards, and a touchdown. Stafford had 346 yards passing and 2 touchdowns, both the Johnsons. So it'll be interesting to see, Cam Newton's return and like you said, Derek Anderson played better than most people expected. I know I picked Tampa Bay to win that game, and Carolina and Derek Anderson were a bit of a surprise on that note. So, and now we're gonna go ahead over to the 4:00 games here, and we have the Rams at Buccaneers. Tampa Bay's -5.5 after last week's loss.
What do you? Before we get there, what do you think's the best early game?
The best early game?
Most interesting early game.
Good question. Let me take a look here.
I mean, for me, I'd want to tune into the Jacksonville-Washington game just to see how wrong they get it.
That's one of those games where like you want to watch to see how bad it is, but as a fan of football, you're like telling yourself, I shouldn't be watching this.
Right. I mean, the quality of the play is not going to be great. It's just it's more of a vindication. The best game that I think is going to be Miami Buffalo. I think it's two teams that Miami's still got something to prove. They're not quite the top dog in the AFC East, and Buffalo, especially after being bought by the Sabres owner today. Right. It seems like they might be able to turn things around for them. Maybe
a little bit. Yeah,
maybe the shot in the arm they need.
Dolphins-Bills is definitely an intriguing game, especially since they both won last week. New England was the only team in that division with a loss. So it'll be kind of interesting to see how that plays out. For me, I'm probably going to go Falcons-Bengals as my interesting game, 1:00 game of week 2. They both have wonderful receivers to watch. Falcons have Julio Jones and Roddy White. Bengals have AJ Green, as I mentioned earlier. So I think that's going to be a fun game to watch, especially if you're a fan of the passing game. If like I said, if they get that going and can get the running game going, Bengals, might have a shot at winning this game outright. But yeah, I think as far as interesting or unsure game to watch, it would be Jaguars Redskins. Just I'm not really sure what to expect from that one. We might see Kirk Cousins, we might see Blake Bortles, so that might be kind of fun. And also the other one that might be fun to keep an eye on too is the Saints Browns. If the Saints go up huge, we might get a Johnny Manziel appearance. So first one of the year might be a bit exciting.
I just want Bortles to play for Jacksonville just because I like his last name. I want to hear all the wine cooler jokes he'll bring up once he starts playing.
Yeah,
But
and he's
let's just be glad that CBS is going to have a 4 o'clock game this week instead of airing tennis. I mean,
right.
tennis is great, but it's time for football.
Yeah, last week there were only two 4 o'clock games due to tennis. This week we have looks like we have 5 games, so that's definitely a plus. A little bit easier to keep track of than having so many games on at one and then only two at four like last week. So first 4 o'clock game we have here is the Rams, the Buccaneers. Buccaneers minus 5.5.
It's hard to put a lot of faith in St. Louis after they got completely embarrassed last week. So long story short, I'm going to take Tampa.
Yeah, that 5.5's a little. I'm a little concerned about that. I know Tampa's playing at home, and the Rams, like you said, they were terrible. I expected them to at least put up a fight against Minnesota. That went a little more one sided than I expected. Even with the quarterback situation. You know, Zach Stacy for St. Louis only had 11 carries for 43 yards. Rams just couldn't get anything going, it seemed. So I want to take Tampa, and I think I'm going to. That one I'm a little skeptical about at minus 5.5, but I think the Buccaneers just have the weapons to win the game. Even though they didn't play that great last week against Carolina, they're going to have a little bit of a slightly easier time against the Rams defense. So especially playing at home. So yeah, I'll take Tampa as well. And that game, I don't know about that game. I'm going to keep an eye on it. I'm going to watch it here and there, but I'm probably not going to pay very close attention to it. It just doesn't really intrigue me too much.
It's hard to be excited about the bottom feeders in the NFC South and the NFC West.
Right. And even though I had high hopes for Tampa prior to Week 1, maybe they can turn things around. Like I said, it's only been one game so far. They're still trying to work out the kinks, I guess. That 4 preseason games of spring training couldn't get out, but hopefully Mike Evans becomes more of a target for him, and Doug Martin can get a bit more touches because he really didn't do anything last week. And in fact, Buccaneers leading rusher was Lane at 1 carry, 54 yards. So that right there tells you what the running game was like for Buccaneers.
Right. I mean, with Doug Martin too, he played really short season last year, so it seems like he would maybe come out with a little more pep. But he and Zach Stacy, they both just had real stinkers of games last week. So it's either going to be the same thing this week where they're not going to get a bulk of the carries and they're just going to change the focus of their offense to something more pass heavy, or maybe it's their redemption game. So hopefully, I mean, it's for Zach Stacy, he was one of my higher fantasy football picks, so hopefully he can get it together.
I know he's like that for a lot of people. They were kind of hoping for him to take over the load there in St. Louis and just have a breakout year.
He was just that rock and a hard place pick. You get to the end of your first round and you're making your first pick and all the good ones are taken, and then you're kind of left with that weird, should I take Zach Stacy? Should I not take Zach Stacy? Well, clearly I took Zach Stacy, but it's going to be interesting to see how well that those two rebound from a pretty poor Week 1.
Yeah, and the next 4 o'clock game, I'm kind of anxious to talk about this one. So we have the Seahawks at the Chargers. Seahawks are -6.
This is probably going to be the best 4 o'clock game because you've got the established leader, especially of the NFC, if not the whole league, and then you have the Chargers, which we were pretty high hopes upon before last week when they unexpectedly, I'll say, lost to Arizona. But I think that San Diego still has high hopes for this year. Even still, Seattle just completely drubbing Green Bay gives me way too much faith in Seattle right now. That's why I'm taking the Seahawks.
All right, well, I'm going to go the opposite here. I still have high. I'm throwing a little.
That's ballsy.
I got to mix it up a little bit. Go out on a limb here, make it exciting. So I'm going to go with the Chargers. Playing at home, I think this is a game they could win. Call me crazy, but Seattle's defense obviously is one of the greatest defenses of all time. Richard Sherman no, he didn't have a single pass thrown to him last week against Green Bay. Um, and that tells you something right there about how good they are. But I think Philip Rivers kind of puts last week's game out of his mind. I think he's matured a little bit. I hope I'm not wrong in that, but I think they have a shot to at least make it a close game. So I'm going to take Chargers take the points +6 for the Chargers there. If they work a way to get Keenan Allen open, maybe some screen passes to open some other things up. Ryan Matthews had a good game last week with a touchdown. Antonio Gates started to play well as well. He had led the team with 6 receptions, so he's still a weapon, even though he might be getting a little up there age wise for a tight end. But yeah, I'm gonna take the Chargers. I just got a feeling, and I don't know if it's just because I picked them to win a Super Bowl or if I actually believe they have a shot at this game. But that's, like you said, that's definitely going to be the most interesting 4 o'clock game for sure.
I was a little surprised that they gave so many targets to Antonio Gates because, as you said, he's getting pretty old. So I figured they would probably start to pass the torch to their backup, but it seems like they're not quite content on doing that yet.
Yeah, and maybe that's Antonio Gates, playing with a chip on his shoulder. Maybe he's realizing that the last couple of seasons haven't been as good as some of his previous years, and maybe he's trying to find a way to stay involved and stay part of this offense. So hopefully that continues. That'd be good for the Chargers if he's able to step up his play a little bit more and put forth a better effort.
Fair enough.
But we'll see what happens. That's at 4 or 5. Like I said, that's a game I'm going to be watching intently for sure. So let's move on to, this might be the least interesting game at 4 o'clock. Texans at Raiders. Houston is -3 on the road.
What a great progression of schedule for Oakland. First they get the Jets, which nobody believes in, and now they get the Houston Texans, which we don't know what to believe for them, because last week when they took on Washington, as I said earlier, was that game we learned absolutely nothing about.
Right.
I feel like Vegas is even having trouble getting a grip on what this game is, because they're not going with the usual home team gets that for granted 3 points. They're giving Houston 3.
Right.
But I'm feeling a little frisky on this pick, so that's why I picked Oakland.
All right. I like that. I'm going to take the Texans. I just think...
Sell me on the Texans.
Well, it obviously it hurts that Clowney's out. He's going to be out for 4 to 6 weeks, like we had mentioned. Their defense is still strong. J.J. Watt stepped up last week. Had a really, really good game. The Texans' offense still, even with Fitzpatrick as their quarterback, I would still take them over. Oakland's wide receivers and running backs. And rookie Derek Carr. Granted, Carr did throw 2 touchdowns last week, and I thought, they might have been able to pull out that game against the Jets. But they just couldn't get the running game going. McFadden led the Oakland rushing attack with 4 carries for 15 yards. That's 15-1-5. So, Texans' front line is, even without Clowney, is still a hassle. And I don't know if Derek Carr is going to be able to step up, and get the ball to his receivers in a timely manner, in that secondary. DeAndre Hopkins had a good game. Arian Foster had 100 yards rushing. Andre Johnson had 93 yards receiving on 6 catches. So I just think there's too many offensive weapons on the Texans for the Raiders to overcome this game. Even if it is -3 on the road, I'm still fairly confident that Ryan Fitzpatrick is good enough to get that done.
Yeah, I think the Raiders aren't quite feeling so frowny after Clowney went downy, so maybe their offense can go to towny.
Any
but
more?
I mean, no, I couldn't think of any more rhymes.
All right.
I mean, the thing with Houston, you take away. I mean, Andre Johnson had a great game as he normally does, but you take away that nice long game that resulted in a touchdown for DeAndre Hopkins, and their passing attack didn't really do that much. I mean, Fitzpatrick threw 22 times, which isn't that many. They did get a lot of yards out of Arian Foster. But it might be interesting if Oakland can somehow utilize that two-headed monster they have in the backfield for MJD and McFadden.
Yeah, but I mean, I just keep looking at that McFadden stat. I mean, he led the team with 4 carries and 15 yards. I mean, that means MJD didn't even get more than 15 yards against. Now, granted, the Jets' rush defense is up there as far as ranks go, but you should be able. Most running backs can get 15 yards in 3 or 4 carries, and over the course of a few plays as opposed to an entire game. So maybe I'm overvaluing that stat. I don't know, but that's just what sticks out to me. And the fact that Carr was 20 of 32 for 151 yards, it didn't show too much promise to me either. So that's kind of why I'm going with the Texans. A little bit more tried and true at this point than the Raiders.
I've always been kind of a closet Darren McFadden fan, and the last couple of years it seems like he doesn't get a lot on average on his carries, but he might break off one of those big runs. If they can get some big production out of Jones-Drew as far as the bulk of the carries, and then maybe get one big flash out of McFadden, maybe they'll be all right. I don't know. I mean, it's Oakland. Who knows?
Yeah, it could be, and McFadden has been battling injuries throughout his career, but when he has been able to stay healthy, he has been able to put up some decent numbers. But maybe their offense was just too out of sync for the first game of the year, starting under a rookie quarterback and trying to figure out carries between Jones-Drew and McFadden. So maybe that's something that kind of comes together for him, but I don't think that happens this week. All right, next up here we have the Jets against the Packers. Green Bay is at home, and they're favored at 8.5.
Is this an FU for Green Bay? Now that they got trounced by Seattle last week, is this like the FU, we're going to win?
Absolutely.
Is that why they're favoring them by 8.5?
I absolutely think that's why it is.
It's hard not to take Green Bay when they're playing at Lambeau. They just got embarrassed last week.
They've had extra days of rest.
Right. And it seems like, Aaron Rodgers, it seems like he made a lot of really weird decisions in the game against Seattle, and they couldn't get their passing game, and kind of their bread and butter didn't really work. And now they're a chance to play at home. It's a chance to finally get a win. They're playing the Jets. 8.5, it's kind of it's a really big hurdle. It's just inviting a tease to get it down to 2.5. But even still, I feel all right with taking Green Bay.
Yeah, I'm going to go with you on that. I just think Aaron Rodgers is going to be too angry about what happened last week. Not that just that they lost, but that they got blown out. That's nothing you like, especially a competitor like him. I think he's going to come out strong. Like you said, playing at Lambeau, where they rarely lose a game. I just don't think the Jets are going to be able to keep up with them. That line does make it a little tough though, because the Jets were a little bit more impressive than I had expected them. Chris Ivory had 10 carries for 102 yards. Chris Johnson had a touchdown. Geno Smith had was 23 of 28, so he only threw 5 incomplete passes, and that's definitely progress on his part. Whether he can keep that up, we have yet to see. But I just think the Packers are going to be playing with a chip on their shoulder because of last week's blowout. So I'm going to take them as well at minus 8.5, and hope I don't regret this later. Let's see, another 4 o'clock game here. We have Kansas City Chiefs at the Denver Broncos. Denver's minus 13.5. What do you think?
I'm hesitant to take Denver just because it seems like it's one of those golden rules of gambling that you don't take the favorite when it's double digits. But after the card that Kansas City turned in last week and the way Denver plays, I'm really hard pressed to not want to bet on Denver.
Well, Alex Smith did lead Kansas City in rushing yards with 36, so maybe that's something they could shoot for.
It's one of those things that it's going to be just like the Dallas Tennessee game. It's one of those where if Denver gets up early, Kansas is going to have to go more pass heavy, and I don't think that's going to be their strong suit. Even though they do get Dwayne Bowe back this week, so they can team him up and play on opposite side as Donnie Avery and get a better passing attack. I still don't think they quite have the weapons or the arsenal that Denver does. Denver's just loaded, so yeah. I'm all right with Denver minus 13.
Yeah, and normally too, I follow that rule where if it's double digits, you take the points. But Denver's just too strong. Kansas City, they impressed us last year. I think that was a bit of a fluke. As we had talked about last week, they kind of had somewhat of a cupcake schedule for the first few games where they start out 9-10 in a row or so. But Denver playing at home on a Sunday, 4:00 game, they might win this game by 20 for all we know. Like I said, they just have too many weapons. I mean, Peyton Manning's a quarterback. It's so hard to go against him, especially when they're kind of clicking on all cylinders like they were last week. They started to blow Indianapolis out, but Indianapolis kind of started to come back a little bit. I don't consider Indianapolis and Kansas City on the same level, so I'm going to take Denver at minus 13.5. They're just too strong. Even with Wes Welker out, Emmanuel Sanders had, I think like 90 or 100 yards or something like that. Demaryius Thomas had a few touchdowns, and
Julius Thomas.
Or I'm sorry, yeah, Julius Thomas had 3 touchdowns and 104 yards. Monte Ball had a touchdown and 67 yards rushing on 23 carries. So I just think it's going to be too much for the Chiefs. So I'm going to take Denver as well, and hope I don't jinx them this week.
No, you'll be fine. I mean, when a team has deep threats like Emmanuel Sanders and Demaryius Thomas, and you have Peyton Manning as quarterback, and you get a 3-touchdown monster game out of your tight end, you're going to be fine.
Yeah, and that's what I like to hear after I say I'm going to make a bet is you're going to be fine. So
yeah, but then again,
I'm not worried at all. So thank you.
But then again, I jinxed Clowney, so we'll see if I go 2 for 2.
Yeah. So thanks for that in advance.
Or maybe I'm like the Patriots. I don't jinx two weeks in a row.
2 weeks in a row. All right. So that means we are fine, right?
Yeah, we're fine.
All right.
Addition by subtraction.
Addition by addition. All right. Let's see. The Sunday night game we have at 8:30, the Bears at the 49ers. San Francisco's -7 at home.
Oh boy, I mean, if this were flipped around and it was San Francisco at Chicago, I don't know if the line would be the same. I think it would be almost like something like Chicago goes on FU mode after they kind of get a little embarrassed by Buffalo. Not quite the same as Green Bay getting trounced by Seattle, but I don't know. It's everybody seemed pretty high up on the Bears until they lost to Buffalo, and even the same with San Francisco. It seems like people didn't kind of know how to rate them before the season. They beat the Cowboys team who has a terrible defense, and Colin Kaepernick has a pretty okay day against that defense. I feel more comfortable with giving the points to Chicago only in the sense that it's 2 teams that I'm not quite sure how to rate yet. It's still too early to make an informed decision on either of them.
Yeah, and it's tough with the Niners, like you said, playing against Dallas last week. You couldn't quite get a good reading on whether they were legitimately good or if it was just Dallas defense is that bad. So I got a feeling though that San Francisco is better than most people are giving them credit for. I'm going to take San Fran at home. I think this is a game they win. By 8 or 10 points. Jay Cutler is just too back and forth for me. He's not consistent enough. I was hoping he would kind of step it up this year. And, again, this has only been 1 week, so it's a very small sample size. But even even with the weapons that Chicago has, the 49ers I think are just going to be too good for them. Should be a fun game to watch for sure. Bears defense isn't as strong as it used to be. Kaepernick can extend plays. He's great outside the pocket. He doesn't have to throw the ball very much. Last week he threw the ball 23 times for 201 yards and two touchdowns. And I just think it's if they keep the 49ers keep to their game plan and to their way of playing, they can win this game by more than 7. And it comes down to two about scoring first. If the Niners are able to get ahead and kind of control the clock, get Frank Gore the ball. He's really good and careful with the ball. So it's tough to get a turnover on the 49ers. When you get down.
Right. I mean, the pivotal players you were talking about, it's going to be Jay Cutler. 49ers absolutely feasted off of those 3 interceptions by Tony Romo, and they could turn those into some easy points. So it's another one of those situations where if Jay Cutler is unable to, make some accurate passes, San Francisco's just going to devour those and turn them into some easy points.
Right. And, and who knows, maybe Jay Cutler surprised. Now, Jay Cutler did have a solid game. He threw the ball a lot. He threw it 49 times last week. He did get 349 yards and 2 touchdowns. And that was, against a depleted Bills defense as well. So, it's going to be a little bit different story against San Francisco with, Patrick Willis on the other side of the ball. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out especially for Jay Cutler. Maybe they go a little bit heavier on Matt Forte. He had 17 carries last week. Maybe they get him, 21, 22, 23 carries, somewhere in that range, if the game allows for it.
Right. I mean, and with last week, it was one of those things where the momentum kind of dictated their game plan. Buffalo goes into the half leading 17-7. So Chicago, even though they're not trailing by too many points, and they were able to erase that deficit in the third quarter anyway, they kind of had to shift their offensive attack and take away some carries from Matt Forte. And it's going to be one of those games that if Forte can kind of run at full steam, that they might be able to get more production out of the running game and not quite have to worry so much about Jay Cutler.
Yeah, and even with all those yards Jay Cutler threw, like I said, he had 349 yards. The leading receiver was Matt Forte. He had 8 receptions for 87 yards. So, Brandon Marshall was kind of in and out for a couple plays with an injury, so obviously that affected him. Martellus Bennett had a solid game at tight end. They didn't get Alshon Jeffrey as involved as I think a lot of people expected. So maybe that's something they change in their game plan for this week. Kind of throw it his way a little bit more.
No, it was a fair game for him. He still got 5 catches, and it seems like Cutler is comfortable with spreading it around.
So you're just going to just shoot me down? Just shoot down my ideas?
We'll see. I mean, I've been wrong before, clearly.
All right, so we'll move along here to the Monday night game. We had the Eagles against the Colts. Colts are -3 at home.
It's another one of those tough ones I had in making a decision. I feel more comfortable, especially after that second half, in putting faith in Philadelphia. It was just one of those things that you watch the first half, and it was a tale of two teams, especially with Nick Foles. He made some just dumb decisions in throwing the ball around. It just seems like he wasn't as comfortable with unleashing the deep ball as he was in the second half. But it was one of those things that I don't think their offense was quite at full speed for the first half against Jacksonville.
Right.
And the one thing that I don't think gets enough credit is them signing Darren Sproles. It's going to be one of those things that it's not going to bode well maybe for LaShawn McCoy because Sproles, he had some pretty big gains last game. So it's going to be one of those things where maybe they might not be as shy as shifting over some of the bounce to Darren Sproles instead of LaShawn McCoy. I mean, he had a big gain. He had that big touchdown for 49 yards, which was, it's one of those things that it gives them a little more of a balance in the running game instead of having to explicitly rely on LaShawn McCoy to get all the carries. They now have this two-headed monster, and they can kind of rely a little more on the run, I guess, because now they can just swap in McCoy for Sproles or vice versa whenever they want.
Right, and that's something I mentioned briefly last week. With the Eagles cutting Deshaun Jackson, he was kind of a guy that could play kind of wherever. They could run reverses or run him out of the backfield or out at wide receiver. He was kind of an all over threat, and the signing of Darren Sproles in the offseason kind of reestablished that. Now, granted, they're two different players with different styles, but they essentially kind of do the same thing. They kind of make the defense guess anytime they're on the field. It could be as a decoy or as the number one option. So, McCoy's still the number one running back. He did have 21 carries last week. I like that they have Sproles. I like that he's going to take some of the load from McCoy. Just so McCoy doesn't get overused or beat up too much. And I think having them on the field at the same time just wreaks havoc for defenses. Especially if Sproles is spread out in the slot position and LaShawn in the backfield. Might run out for a screen pass or something like that, because both of those guys can make people miss and turn little 3-yard passes into 20-yard gains. So it's something that's fun to watch when they get the rhythm going. But like you mentioned, that first half it was frustrating to watch. You expect the Eagles to come out and perform like they did last year. People just had an expectation Nick Foles to be nearly perfect, and obviously he's not, and he wasn't. I think last year he had 4 turnovers all season in the games that he played, and he had 3 in the first half against Jacksonville. And a lot of that too is like you said, was just poor decision making on his part. There were times where he held on to the ball too long and then he fumbled, or it's just a blatant bad pass, like that one he had in the Reds. It was 1st and 10, and instead of running the ball, they chose to do a fade in the corner, and that's when it got picked off. So that's a little frustrating to watch, but they definitely got it turned around the second half. He ended up with 322 yards and 2 touchdowns. Threw the ball 45 times. So, that game's tough for me as an Eagles fan. I want to pick the Eagles at -3, or at +3 on the road. However, I think the Colts and Andrew Luck just have a little too much going for them. But that 3 is very tempting. And you know what? I think I'm going to do it. I'm going to take the Eagles at +3. Neither defense is great, so it could very well be the highest scoring game all week. Andrew Luck had a couple touchdowns last week and threw for 370 yards on the Denver defense. So yeah, that's what I'm going to go with. I'm going to go with the Eagles. My long-winded explanation comes down to me taking the Eagles on Monday night.
Yeah, it's one of those things where the Eagles' defense and offense kind of relies on finding those mismatches. It seemed like the Jaguars were pretty keyed in to their schemes and routes for the first half, and it felt like Foles wasn't able to take advantage of those coverage mismatches, and he just kind of had to hold on to the ball way too long, resulting in those 2 fumbles. So it was more like a good job on the coverage, perhaps, for the Jaguars, and it was. I mean, Foles also didn't make very good throws.
Right.
And it's going to be one of those things where if Andrew Luck is able to exploit those mismatches on coverage, maybe he'll be able to, rack up some passing yards against the Eagles. The only thing I'm worried about for them is I'm not super comfortable with their deep threats. It seems like they like to send their tight end Ertz out on these long routes, and maybe even Macklin every once in a while. But the thing that they do have going for them is always running that pistol formation. It's a lot of people to keep track of each down.
Right, and the one thing too that's gonna hurt the Eagles is their left guard Evan Mathis is out. He's on the injured reserve list. Was it here? He sprained his MCL on the game on Sunday, so he's going to be out for quite a while. I think in 6 to 8 weeks, I believe, is when he'll be expected to return. So it'll be interesting to see how that affects the coverage as well. But yeah, and Andrew Luck is one of the smartest quarterbacks in the game. So he's very good at making smart decisions. There might have been one or two passes last week against Denver that didn't go, the way he expected them to. But that's football. So yeah, we'll see what happens this week against the Eagles secondary. And like I said, I think that might end up being one of the highest scoring games of the week. Just for conversation's sake, the over under on that game is 54. And that's something I'd be tempted if I were a bet man to take the over. So that'll be something to keep an eye on as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of factors with this game that really keep me from betting a lot of Little Caesars hot and ready slices of pizza on it. It's just two teams that they kind of need to do specific things on offense and defense to really succeed, and it's kind of a if they can situation. But I think Philadelphia has a really good chance.
Yeah, I like hearing you say that. So I'm not sure if you're jinxing me again or what's going on.
No, I already jinxed two things. I can't triple jinx.
You can't triple jinx and double jinx?
No, that's extending way past my range.
Well, you know what? There's a first time for everything. So we'll see. Keep track of your jinxes this week, and we'll see how you do next week.
I've already got too many things to keep track of.
Well, that's what smartphones are for.
I guess. That's what the iPhone 6 will help me out. Keeping track of all my jinxes.
Hey, speaking of which, there's a really nice write-up on entertainmentbuddha.com for those interested in the iPhone 6. So be sure to check that out.
Any other thoughts for week 2?
No. I think we pretty much covered everything. Like we said, there's some really interesting games to watch, especially this early in the season, and some teams trying to make a stand in the division here in the first couple weeks.
Yeah, it's nice that they have these games nice and spread out so that there's something to watch for each time slot. Something nice on Thursday, something nice for the early game Sunday, nice for the late game Sunday, and then the national game. Still pretty exciting. Even Monday's pretty exciting to watch.
Yeah, I guess Mondays would be okay.
Mondays will be okay.
Yeah, but
they're both good.
They're both good. But until then, if you need some sports, there's some baseball going on, and I believe there was a WNBA game happening on ESPN for those interested. So, take some time to check those out if you're missing sports.
You can't be an athlete, be an athletic supporter.
Exactly. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in this week, and be sure to check out www.entertainmentbuddha.com and join us again next week as we lick our wounds from what's going to happen this coming week, because I think Lud's going to go for a 3 jinx week here.
No, I'm done licking my wounds. Hopefully I'm going to turn it around, especially for the first week that I might actually, bet some Oreo cookies on a 3-team teaser. Now that I know what it is.
What kind of Oreo cookies? Regular, or is there a flavor?
Double stuff.
Ooh,
STUF.
Stuff. All right.
Stuff.
All right. Going for the big stuff, huh?
Yep.
All right.
Go hard or go home.
Well, then next week's picks will be brought to you by Oreo Double Stuffed Cookies. And that's it for all of us here at No Punt Intended Podcast. And we'll see you all next week.